But beloved, there are times when principle and custom clashes that are so significant and so important that we need to be extremely alert to them. It is never excusable for a believer, or anyone else for that matter, to disobey a principle set forth by God for the sake of a custom or of a tradition or of a contemporary community standard. This past week, I had the opportunity to do a radio interview on renewing your mind with Dr. Del Tackett. Some of you know of Dr. Tackett. He was the architect for the Truth Project that has had a phenomenal impact on Christendom in America and abroad. And Dr. Tackett's thing, his focus, his specialty is in the area of what we call worldview, or Weltanschauung. Worldview, as the word suggests, simply is an examination of those core principles and ideas that shape and dictate our understanding of the world in which we live, our understanding of ourselves, of the human race, of this planet, and every aspect of our lives. It's an amazing thing that we find people who have so much in common, who can agree on so many things, can at the same time come to that point in their thinking where their unity parts and they go down radically different roads and believe radically different things. Do you ever think about that? I think about it a lot. I ask myself all the time, why do people think the way they think? Sometimes I think, what on earth are they thinking? How could they come to such viewpoints? How could they come to such conclusions? And so often I think not so much why they are thinking, but if they are thinking at all. Because one of the greatest enemies to sanctification, to godliness, and to the Christian pilgrimage is the enemy of what is customarily accepted in the culture in which we live. Whatever is accepted in the culture is received by so many people to be normative. When you look at the history of the United States and the ethical conflicts that we have endured throughout our short history, you think that near the top of the list, I would rank it as the second most egregious ethical issue our nation has ever faced, was the issue of slavery. And you realize that people who were well respected, in many cases godly people, who bought and sold slaves as chattel, who debated the question of whether those slaves had souls, as to whether they were really human. Can you imagine educated, enlightened people having discussions like that? And do you have any idea what Wilberforce and others had to go through to change public opinion, to change what was customary, to change what was acceptable in the secular culture and even in the religious culture with respect to slavery. But it was a custom. And people had grown accustomed to it and didn't think about it in any great depth. I said a moment ago that in my opinion, slavery was the second most egregious ethical issue our country's ever faced. And I think that far ahead of that is the issue of abortion. And I pray God for a multitude of Wilberforces who will relentlessly speak against this monstrous evil until such a day that our nation will wake up. But I listen to the rhetoric, I see the signs, and I say, are you people thinking at all? Pro-choice? A woman has a right to her own body, even though we know that that unborn child has its own unique DNA. It may be in her body, but it's not a part of her body. It has its own unique identity, its own heart, its own brain, its own consciousness. And you see the videotapes of the actual procedure by which these unborn children are mutilated, and you can't hear it, but you see the silent scream. You see the reaction, the visible, physical reaction of the unborn child in the contortions of its face, the screams of its mouth, and its revulsion in pain as its body is being torn limb by limb. Auschwitz? At least those people had some time to live on this planet before they were tortured to death. Now I ask you this. That baby has a brain. Does it have a mind? It has a heart. Does it have feelings? Is there a nascent faculty of the will present? I have never in my life heard of an unborn baby choosing to be mutilated. That mother's choice ends exactly where that baby's choice begins, just as my freedom ends where your freedom begins. What could be more simple than that? But it's accepted. It's part of the culture of death in which we live. And as I've said, every chance I get it, I've studied theology for over 50 years, and there are things about God I don't know. He's incomprehensible. But if I know anything about God, I don't just think, I know without a shadow of a doubt that he hates abortion. And he will judge nations that support it. But there are churches that support it. There are people in this room who support it. And I don't think they've thought about it for 5 minutes. How could they? We may be that wicked, but we're not that stupid. But that is a custom that collides with a vengeance, with the principles of the sanctity of life set forth by our God. And so I beg you not to base your life on what is acceptable in your culture. I just talked to a lady the other day, a very nice lady. She's divorced, and she looked at me, talked to me. She knows I'm a pastor. And she said, well, I never thought I'd be using birth control at this age in my life, but I need to because my boyfriend wants me to. She said it to me without shame. Just as we have people in the church living, cohabiting without shame, because it's acceptable. Yes, it's acceptable by a culture that's pagan. Yes, it's acceptable by a culture that's barbarian. But it's not acceptable in the house of God. And the first thing you have to understand if you're going to be a Christian is that you cannot be conformed to this world. That we march to a different drummer. You can't say that Jesus is Lord and allow the social mores of your community dictate your behavior. It's that simple. Well, thank God for Zacharias. And they made signs to him what he would have the child called. And he asked for a writing tablet, and he wrote saying, his name is John. Did you catch that? He didn't say the same thing that Elizabeth said. What did Elizabeth say? She said, he shall be called John. Say, we'll see about that. We'll ask Zacharias. And so they asked Zacharias, and he asked for the tablet, and he writes on the tablet what? His name will be John? No. He said, his name is John. The deed is done. The discussion is over. He already has his name. His name is John. And at that point, Zacharias had shown how much he was controlled by custom and how much he was controlled by the Word of God.